Did you know that one of history's most brutal conquerors is worshipped as a founding father by an entire nation? What if everything that you thought you knew about Genghis Khan has been filtered through the eyes of his enemies for 800 years? I'm Alex Arnold, and welcome to another ride on Arnie's Brain Train, where I hope to flip your understanding of one of history's most contested narratives. Now, a fair warning, we are going to discuss some positive aspects of Genghis Khan's empire, but that doesn't mean that I think that he was good or a net positive. We're just examining how different perspectives shape narratives. Everything I'm telling you is backed by historical research, primary documents, and sources from multiple perspectives listed in the description below or in the pinned comment. I make these videos myself with stock images and AI art because I'm just a guy who likes to put out peer-reviewed information that people don't usually get to see or hear. If examining multiple sides of history makes you uncomfortable, well, that's kind of the point of this entire video and the channel. So, if you're ready to discover how centuries of propaganda shaped your understanding of one man who changed the world, let's go ahead and dive in. Here we go. Let's start with the Genghis Khan that you probably learned about in school. Bloodthirsty barbarian from the steppes of Mongolia, right? A savage who swept across Asia and Europe, destroying cities, massacring millions, and leaving nothing but death and destruction in his wake. The numbers are staggering. Historians estimate his conquests may have killed up to 40 million people, roughly 11% of the world's population at the time. To put that in perspective, that's like wiping out the entire population of modern-day Canada and Australia combined. Cities like Kiev, Baghdad, and Beijing were reduced to rubble. Entire civilizations were wiped off the map. This is the man who supposedly said, "The greatest happiness is to vanquish your enemies, to chase them before you, to rob them of their wealth." The stories go on, and they're disturbing. When the Mongols took Nishapur in 1221, they allegedly killed every living thing: men, women, children, even cats and dogs. The Persian chronicler Giovanni wrote that no head of a living creature was seen. When they conquered Kiev, Giovanni da Pian del Carpine reported seeing countless skulls and bones scattered across the fields 6 years later. For centuries, this has been the story and the narrative of Genghis Khan in the Western world. A monster, a destroyer, the ultimate example of barbaric conquest. Medieval European chroniclers called him the Scourge of God and Satan's messenger on earth. Even modern movies and documentaries continue this narrative. But here's where things get interesting. Fast forward to modern Mongolia, and you'll find something fascinating. Genghis Khan isn't remembered as a monster. He's their George Washington, their founding father, their greatest hero, all rolled into one. His face is on their money, their airport is named after him, and there's a massive 130-foot tall statue of him on horseback, dominating the landscape outside their capital. But why? What story are Mongolians telling that's so different from ours? To them, Genghis Khan was the man who united warring tribes that had been killing each other for centuries, created the first international postal system that connected continents, established religious tolerance across his empire when Europe was burning heretics, promoted trade routes along the Silk Road that made everyone richer, and gave women more rights than they had had in most of the civilized world. Mongol women could own property, initiate divorce, and serve as political advisors. Revolutionary for the 13th century. He also abolished torture when it was standard practice everywhere else, promoted people based on merit rather than their birth when Europe was locked in feudalism, and created what many historians now call the first truly meritocratic society. If you were talented, it didn't matter if you were born a peasant or a prince. Under Mongol rule, a merchant could safely travel from Korea to Hungary carrying a Mongol passport, the first international travel document. Religious minorities were protected when other empires were conducting genocides. Knowledge flowed freely between East and West like never before. The Mongols didn't just conquer, they connected the world in ways that wouldn't be seen again until the modern era. And here's something that might surprise you. but much of what we consider Renaissance knowledge in Europe actually came through Mongol trade routes. Printing, gunpowder, paper money, even the compass, all facilitated by the very barbarians we've been taught to fear. The European Renaissance might not have happened without Mongol innovation. Now, this is all great to know for trivia night, but understanding how the same person can be both a hero and a villain shows us something important about how stories shape our entire worldview, even today. So here's the big question. Why are these stories so dramatically different? The answer lies in understanding who got to write the history books, and this is where things get kind of interesting. Most of our Western narrative about Genghis Khan comes from the chronicles of the people that he conquered: Chinese dynasties, Islamic caliphates, European kingdoms. Imagine if the only stories about George Washington came from British loyalists, or if everything you knew about World War II came exclusively from German sources. You'd get a pretty skewed picture, right? The famous Persian historian Giovanni, writing about the destruction of his homeland, described the Mongols as people who emerged from the confines of the unknown. Chinese chroniclers painted them as savage horsemen from the edge of the civilized world. European monks wrote about them as literally apocalyptic, the four horsemen of the end times. These weren't neutral observers, they were the victims, writing while their cities still smoldered. And maybe you don't know this, but victims rarely write flattering obituaries for their conquerors. So here's what's kind of wild. For nearly 700 years, we've had almost no Mongol perspective on their own history. The secret history of the Mongols, their primary historical source, wasn't even translated into Western languages until the 20th century. We've been learning about the Mongols without ever hearing the Mongol side of the story for 700 years. Think about that for a second. 7 centuries of one-sided storytelling. It's like trying to understand a divorce by only talking to one spouse, or understanding a war by only interviewing the losing side 7 centuries later. Here's a quick challenge for you. Think of any major historical event that you learned about in school. Now, ask yourself, whose perspective did you learn it from? Who was telling that story? And who might have been left out? I guarantee you'll start noticing patterns that you've never seen before. This is exactly why modern historians are frantically trying to reconstruct Mongol history from archaeological evidence, Mongol oral traditions, and sources that aren't written by their enemies. What they're finding is reshaping everything that we thought we knew. Now let's really talk about why this matters beyond just ancient history. What we're seeing with Genghis Khan is how narratives control opinions, and the same process is still being used today. Think about it for a second. The same person who brought religious tolerance to Asia became the poster child for barbarism in Europe. The man who created trade networks spanning continents became synonymous with destruction. How does that happen? It happens through repetition, selective evidence, and emotional storytelling. The conquests were real, the deaths were real, but so were the innovations, the connections, and the unprecedented freedoms. The difference is which parts of the story get told, retold, and amplified until they become common knowledge. And this is definitely not just a medieval phenomenon. Look at how different countries teach about colonialism. British textbooks emphasize infrastructure and trade, while Indian textbooks emphasize exploitation and famine. Same events, different narratives. Or how the same political figure can be a freedom fighter in one country's textbook and a terrorist in another's. The facts don't change, but the frame around those facts transforms their meaning. Here's another experiment. Pick any major corporation and Google both their official company history and then search for criticism of whatever company it is. You'll get 2 different stories about the exact same organization. Same company, same timeline, but different narratives depending on who's doing the telling. This matters for your daily life. Every news story, every historical account, every common knowledge fact that you think you know has been filtered through someone's perspective. Someone chose what to emphasize and what to leave out. So, what's the truth about Genghis Khan? Was he good or was he bad? Well, the truth is, it's complicated, and that's the point. Yes, Genghis Khan's conquest resulted in massive death tolls. Yes, cities were destroyed and populations decimated. These aren't propaganda. They're documented historical facts backed by archaeological evidence, contemporary accounts, and genetic studies showing population bottlenecks in conquered regions. But also, yes, the Mongol Empire created unprecedented cultural exchange, religious tolerance, and technological advancement. These are also documented historical facts. The Mongols created the largest library in the world at the time, translating works from Chinese, Persian, Arabic, and Latin into Mongolian. They established international law, created diplomatic immunity, and invented the concept of international trade agreements. And here's another thing. Genghis Khan's own laws prohibited his soldiers from looting until a city had formally surrendered. Cities that surrendered peacefully were often left completely intact and allowed to govern themselves. But cities that resisted? Well, that's where the stories of total destruction come from. It wasn't mindless savagery. It was actually psychological warfare designed to make the next city surrender without a fight. Now, from a Mongol perspective, this actually saved lives. From the perspective of the city being destroyed as an example, this was genocide. Both can be true simultaneously. Again, the difference isn't in the facts themselves, but in which facts we choose to center our story around. Western narratives centered the destruction because that's what the conquered peoples experienced and remembered. Mongolian narratives center the unification and innovation because that's what their ancestors built and celebrated. Neither story is completely wrong, but neither story is completely right either. The real Genghis Khan was both the destroyer of civilizations and the creator of the world's largest contiguous empire. He was both the cause of massive suffering and the architect of unprecedented global connection. The lesson isn't that one side is lying, it's that every story, even this one, is told from a position, with a purpose, and with particular details highlighted while others fade into the background. This pattern is everywhere once you start looking for it. Think about how differently Americans and Vietnamese learn about the Vietnam War. One side emphasizes stopping communism, the other emphasizes fighting colonialism. How differently Israelis and Palestinians understand their shared history. How differently the American Revolution looks from British versus American textbooks. Freedom fighters or rebellious tax evaders. Once again, we're not talking about lies versus truth here. We're talking about the frame around the truth. And that frame is powerful because it doesn't just change how we understand the past, it changes how we make decisions in the present. Look at how the same CEO can be portrayed as a visionary innovator in business magazines and a ruthless exploiter in labor publications. How the same military intervention gets called liberation by supporters and invasion by critics. How the same scientific study gets spun as either breakthrough discovery or dangerous experiment, depending on who's reporting it. When you understand that every historical narrative has been shaped by who got to tell it, you start asking better questions. Whose perspective am I getting? What might I be missing? Who benefits from this version of events? What would this story look like from the other side? This applies to everything from how companies present their successes and failures to how politicians frame policy debates, to how your own family tells stories about your childhood. The facts might be accurate, but the story around those facts is always crafted with intention. So here's your homework. Next time you read a news article, look up the same story from a source with a different political leaning. Next time someone tells you about a historical event, ask yourself whose perspective you're getting. Next time you hear, "Everyone knows that," stop and ask, who's the everyone, and what don't they know? Understanding this doesn't make you cynical, it makes you smarter. It helps you consume information more critically and recognize when someone's trying to manipulate your emotions through selective storytelling. So let's bring this brain train back on track and back into the station with everything that we've discovered. We started by asking why Mongolians love a man the rest of the world considers a monster, and we uncovered something much bigger. The same historical figure can be both destroyer and creator, villain and hero, depending entirely on whose story gets told and retold. Genghis Khan shows us that the narratives aren't just stories. They're the lens through which we understand reality. The conquests were real, the innovations were real, the deaths were real, the connections were real. But which one becomes the main character of the story depends on who's holding the pen, what their agenda is, and who gets to keep telling his story for the next 800 years. This matters because in our world of competing narratives, social media echo chambers, and information warfare, understanding how stories shape opinions isn't just academic, it's survival. Every headline you scroll past, every documentary you watch, every common knowledge fact that you share has been filtered through someone's perspective, crafted with intention, and designed to make you feel a certain way. The most powerful question you can ask isn't, "Is this true?" but "Who benefits from me believing this version of the truth?" Because the story might be accurate, but the storyteller always has an agenda. And that's the real lesson of Genghis Khan. Not that history is fake, but that history is always told by someone, for someone, with something to gain or lose by how you understand it. And that's it, everybody. Another adventure on Arnie's Brain Train. If this changed how you think about historical narratives, hit that like button because it helps more people discover these ideas. All of the sources I mentioned are listed in the description or the pinned comment below, and I cannot stress this enough, everything I just told you is backed by historical scholarship, primary documents, and peer-reviewed research. This isn't opinion, this is documented history from multiple perspectives that most people never get to see. If you want to see me tackle other controversial topics or explore different historical mysteries, let me know in the comments. Subscribe to the channel and help me grow because your support helps me keep making these videos and telling the truth regardless of how it makes people feel. Finally, drop a comment and tell me what common knowledge historical fact do you think might be told from only one perspective. I do read every comment. Thanks for joining us here where we turn questions into discoveries, one truth at a time. And remember, the world isn't always this simple, but it's always this interesting. I'm Alex Arnold, and I'll see you on the next ride aboard Arnie's Brain Train. See you there. Bye.